Welcome. This isn't a video to distract you, it's a space for understanding. Here, the psychology of human behavior is addressed rationally, directly, and profoundly, without empty promises or catchy phrases. Today, we'll talk about a silent pain that crosses different personalities, distinct histories, and various phases of life. The feeling of constantly being hurt by people, situations, and relationships. Perhaps you've already thought that the problem is always with the other person. Or perhaps you've begun to suspect that there's an invisible pattern repeating itself within you. The loneliness that arises after disappointments, the difficulty in trusting, the habit of emotionally shutting down, the fear of exposing yourself again. None of this is random. In this video, inspired by the thinking of Carl Jung, we'll analyze why certain experiences continue to hurt you, and above all, what changes when you develop a psychological structure that doesn't depend on validation, approval, or the behavior of others. Throughout this content, you will understand how to strengthen your personality, reorganize your internal boundaries, and transform your relationship with the social world. The goal is clear: to reach the point where nothing and no one has any more psychological power over you. If this idea has already sparked something inside you, stay until the end, because what will be discussed here is not comfort, it's clarity. Before continuing, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end, because what comes next is not quick content. It's a lesson that only makes sense when you go through the whole process. Now, let's get straight to the point. The invisible pattern that makes everything hurt again. At some point in life, most people begin to think that the world is too aggressive. People disappoint, relationships cool down, words hurt more than they should. Carl Jung observed that when something external hurts us repeatedly, it is almost never just the event itself, but a sensitive internal point being touched always in the same place. It's like an old wound that any bump makes bleed. Those who experience this tend to wonder why they always attract the same type of relationship, the same distancing, the same social frustration. The thing is, the mind creates emotional habits, and they shape how we interpret glances, silences, and rejections. When you don't understand this mechanism, you start living in a state of alert, waiting for the next blow, even when nothing has happened. And that's exactly where the illusion that the world is cruel is born, when in reality there is an unresolved internal dialogue commanding your reactions. And this leads directly to another, even more uncomfortable point. There is a silent moment when the person realizes that it is no longer what happens that hurts, but the familiarity of the pain. It's strange to admit this, because it seems unfair. You trust, you give yourself in your own way, and again something breaks inside. It could be a pointed phrase, an unexplained distancing, a change of tone that no one comments on, but you feel. Carl Jung observed that the mind creates trails, like paths in the woods. The more you pass through the same place, the easier it becomes to enter there without realizing it. Over time, certain situations are not evaluated for what they are, but for what they awaken. A silence becomes rejection, a criticism becomes an attack, an absence becomes abandonment. Not because it's true, but because it touches on an old issue that has never been confronted directly. The person begins to live as if walking around with a cracked glass. Any impact, however small, makes it seem like everything will break again. The problem is that this pattern goes unnoticed. In everyday life, it disguises itself as intuition, maturity, even emotional intelligence. You start predicting bad endings before the stories even begin. You avoid certain conversations, hold back words, measure reactions. It seems like control, but it's conditioning. Jung called this the shadow, unrecognized parts of one's own experience that continue to influence choices, relationships, and how one positions oneself in the world. And the more a person tries to protect themselves, the more sensitive they become to the same stimuli. It's as if the radar is always on, beeping for anything. The curious thing is that no one around notices this internal battle. On the outside, everything seems normal. On the inside, each interaction carries an old weight. And while this mechanism goes unrecognized, it continues to operate silently, preparing the ground for reactions that seem exaggerated, but which make perfect sense when you understand where they come from. That's when something begins to move, almost imperceptibly, and completely changes the way you relate to the world. When emotional control is mistaken for coldness, many people believe that to avoid getting hurt, they need to shut themselves off, become distant, almost inaccessible. Jung spoke about the construction of personality as a process of differentiation, not isolation. There is a huge difference between having internal boundaries and building walls. The problem is that in everyday life, those who have been hurt often learn to react before they feel. They avoid getting involved, cut conversations short, interpret intentions where there is no proof. It seems like strength, but it's well-organized fear. In social interaction, this creates silent noises, shallow relationships, loneliness disguised as independence, and a constant feeling of being out of place. The curious thing is that the more a person tries to protect themselves from the emotional impact, the more sensitive they become to any sign of rejection. It's a psychological paradox that repeats itself silently, preparing the ground for something even deeper, which almost no one notices while it's happening. At some point, many people confuse self-control with coldness. The person says they have matured, that they are now more rational, that they don't get involved easily. But in practice, what changed was something else. She learned to distance herself before feeling. This appears in the small scenes of everyday life, conversations that could go deeper but remain on the surface, invitations refused without much reason. Short answers, not for lack of subject matter, but for fear of what might come next. Carl Jung observed that personality does not strengthen when it closes itself off, but when it sustains itself. But that takes work. It is easier to create armor than to build a solid internal structure. The problem with this armor is that it weighs you down. At first, it gives a feeling of power. You think that no one affects you anymore, that you are now in control. But little by little, the price appears. Relationships become shallow, silence begins to bother, and all that independence turns into a loneliness that is difficult to explain. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is the loneliness of not being able to be fully present with anyone. The mind begins to interpret approach as a risk. A compliment generates distrust. A sincere interest seems to have ulterior motives. This does not arise from nothing. It is a learned behavior, reinforced by past experiences that taught that feeling comes at a high price. Jung said that what is not integrated into the personality ends up being projected onto the world. And then the world begins to seem cold, invasive, or disappointing, even when it is not. The most curious thing is that this posture does not eliminate sensitivity. On the contrary, those who close themselves off too much tend to react more strongly on the inside, but in silence. An unanswered message becomes a mental whirlwind. A snide comment echoes for days. On the outside, calm. On the inside, tension. It's like living in a seemingly organized house, but with exposed wires behind the wall. No one sees it, but any short circuit can cause damage. When a person begins to realize this, something changes in the way they understand their own social behavior. It's not about becoming someone distant to avoid suffering, but about understanding why certain situations still have so much emotional power. And this perception, when it begins to emerge, opens a new space, discreet but decisive, where control ceases to be an escape and finally begins to become awareness. The moment when no one else has power over you. There is a turning point that Jung described as psychic maturation. It doesn't happen all at once, nor does it come with a warning. It's when you begin to realize that what hurts is not the other person's attitude, but the meaning you attribute to it. From then on, something changes in the way you observe people, social habits, and even solitude. You stop reacting automatically and begin to respond consciously, not because you've become cold, but because you've become whole. Criticism loses its power. Abandonment ceases to define who you are, and the silence of others no longer sounds like a threat. This state doesn't eliminate conflicts, but it removes their power to disorganize you from within. But getting here requires facing a question that almost no one likes to ask themselves, and it is precisely this question that connects everything that comes before with what still needs to be understood. There comes a moment when something changes inside, but it doesn't make a sound. It's not a big event, nor a cinematic turning point. It's more like when you realize that a song that used to hurt you now just passes. The lyrics are the same, but it no longer hits the same spot. Jung spoke of this point as a kind of internal reorganization, when a person begins to understand that it is not the world that needs to be controlled, but the way they position themselves in relation to it. And this becomes clear in the simplest situations. Someone walks away, and for the first time, you don't chase after them or blame yourself. A criticism appears, and instead of becoming a personal attack, it becomes just information. Not because you became indifferent, but because you stopped mixing who you are with what happens. This is the moment when people realize that losing emotional control doesn't start with the other person, it starts with automatic interpretation. Before, any gesture became a test of worth. A no sounded like rejection. A delay seemed like disinterest. Now, there is a small space between the fact and the reaction. It seems small, but this space changes everything. It is in this space that psychological freedom is born. The most curious thing is that, at this stage, you don't become harder but lighter. People notice, not because you impose yourself, but because you don't beg. Not because you raise your voice, but because you maintain silence when necessary. Loneliness ceases to be a threat and becomes a choice. Relationships stop being emotional crutches and become real exchanges. None of this means that you no longer feel pain. It means that pain no longer controls you, and when someone realizes that they no longer need to defend themselves all the time, they begin to see something that previously went unnoticed. Real strength lies not in never being hit, but in not allowing each impact to define who you are. From then on, the question that remains is not about others, but about how far you can sustain this new way of being in the world. When you put all this together, the pattern becomes clear. The pain that always seemed to come from the outside, in fact, found space within. The coldness that seemed like strength was just an improvised protection. And that silent moment of change wasn't luck, it was awareness. Jung said that what is understood ceases to dominate us. And it is precisely here that the loops close. You realize that you no longer need to live anticipating blows, nor distance yourself before feeling, nor carry the weight of automatic interpretations that were never checked. The world remains imperfect. People continue to fail, but something fundamental has changed. It no longer affects you in the same way. Nothing and no one hurts you again, not because you have become unreachable, but because you have stopped abandoning yourself to fit into the expectations, silences, and attitudes of others. When your identity no longer depends on the reaction of others, the impact diminishes. Criticism loses its venom. Abandonment loses the power to define who you are. Loneliness ceases to be punishment and becomes a space of clarity. You understand that emotional maturity is not about closing yourself off. It's about supporting yourself. It's not about hardening. It's about stopping bleeding from wounds that could have already healed. The reflection that remains is simple but uncomfortable. As long as you don't know yourself, anyone can hurt you without touching you. But when you organize yourself internally, the world may try. It just can't stay anymore. And perhaps the real turning point isn't preventing something from hurting, but consciously choosing what still deserves to affect you. And here is the definitive conclusion. There comes a moment when you understand that life hasn't become kinder, you've become more whole. People continue to be who they are, relationships remain imperfect, and the world doesn't change its rhythm because of your expectations. What changes is the place from which you react. When you stop seeking confirmation of your worth from others, no one can hurt you anymore with silence, distance, or opinion. Not because you've closed yourself off, but because you've finally found yourself. Jung believed that those who look outside dream, but those who look inside awaken. And awakening hurts less than continuing to repeat the same cycles. May this reflection stay with you. True power lies not in controlling the world, but in not allowing it to disorganize you from within. From that point on, everything remains the same. Except you. If this content resonated with you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what resonated most with you in this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this now. And take the opportunity to watch the videos that are appearing in the cards, because they continue exactly this conversation that you just started here.